Okay, this is a rehearsal for the presentation in Long Beach. I'm probably not going to say much off of this slide. Okay, so how are we going to get to net zero hospitals by 2025 or 2030? I always say 2025. First up, we need to realize that 90% of the hospitals that will exist in 2025 are already in the ground. My company, for example, has 32 hospitals, and in 2025 we'll probably have 33 or 35 hospitals, and 32 of them exist today. Which is to say that this is not a new construction problem. We need to do this in the portfolio. The second thing to realize is that there's almost no such thing as a lonely hospital building. We tend to build in campuses. So on this picture, there are 3 patient towers, outpatient clinics, regular doctor's offices, behavioral, there's a drug rehab here, etc., etc. So let's talk about producing energy on a campus like this. What if I took the site acreage of this campus and tried to get 10% of that site covered with solar panels? That would look like this. Well, what if I tried to get 20% of this site covered in solar panels? That would look something like this. Actually, this is only about 18%. Now, on this particular site, I couldn't get 30% coverage, but on some sites, maybe I could. So let me show you a big table. What you see here, the first column is a list of hospital sites, and then the second column, you see the total square foot of occupied space on those campuses, not counting parking. The third column is the site acreage, and then the next 3 columns are the annual kWh of production, assuming 1800 kWh per kW of solar panels, and that you're going to get 10%, 20%, or 30% of the site coverage. Everybody with me? Acres times coverage times solar production equals annual energy, right? kWh per year. So now I'm going to take the annual energy and divide by the square foot of the building to show you an energy use index of production. Is that chart. Okay, so if we want our sites to zero out, our consumption needs to match our production, right? I know this is pretty high level back of the napkin math, but I also want you to notice that there's a pretty clear sweet range here. If you're going to have somewhere between 10 and 25% of your campus covered in solar panels, you need to consume somewhere between 40 and 110 kBTU per square foot per year. And to pick a number kind of right in the middle of that range, I call it 65, 60 or 70. Some sites, you could be a lot higher. Your consumption could be higher. Other sites, you're going to need to be 40 or better. But let's just say, for the sake of argument here and discussion, that we need to get down to about 65. So that's the target. If we're going to build net zero hospitals within the existing portfolio, we need to get consumption down to 65 or so. So if you've been paying attention to the last couple of presenters, you probably know the current data. Right now we're sitting at 230, and actually, depending on what source you read here, it could be 230, 250. I've seen some say as high as 275. There's a couple of sources for the number depending on what you read, but really the difference between 230, 250, 270, who cares, right? The best case scenario, we're off by a factor of 5, and we're looking for somewhere between a 60, 2/3 and a 75% reduction in energy. Hospitals are way behind on energy. We're using 2.5 to 5 times as much as other commercial buildings. And so we might want our buildings to be good examples of environmental stewardship and public health awareness, but they're not. And of course, I need to say that all this energy costs money. My CEO says that every leader in healthcare should speak in complete sentences that have a noun, a verb, and some form of the word afford in the sentence, because that's where we're at in U.S. history right now. When you think about hospital energy, you think about medical equipment and lighting. There's a lot of medical equipment plugged in. We run the lights 24/7, right? So that's naturally what we think of when we start thinking about energy. Unfortunately, that thinking is wrong. HVAC is the big gorilla in hospital energy use. 2/3 to 3/4 of our energy goes straight to the HVAC systems. The biggest end use is reheat energy. 90% of hospitals in the US have central systems with terminal heating elements. And so we do a ton of reheat. So we can save energy doing lights and equipments. Yeah, that's fine. but those can only move the needle 10 to 15%, and we're looking for 60 or 75% to get to net zero, right? I've had people in ASHRAE tell me, we need to take baby steps, change things in small increments. This picture does not call for baby steps, ladies and gentlemen. That HVAC number is a huge number, and we need to go after it in a big way. And reheat energy comes from a very understandable place. Reheat energy comes from this table. In hospitals, we use this table, and it's got air change rates and room pressures. When I was in college studying to be a mechanical engineer, I took an HVAC class. I still have that textbook in my garage, and it has a version of this table in it. So from day one, I learned this is how you do hospital air change rates and room pressures. This table has existed largely in the same form that it exists today since about 1968. We don't do this in any other buildings. So why do we do this in hospitals? We do it because yada, 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 infections, right? If you read our magazines, we talk about this stuff right next to a paragraph about hospital-acquired infections. So that's the story we've all been told. That's what we've all been led to believe, that these numbers, these very specific and kind of odd requirements, are there to serve a noble purpose of preventing infections. So let me tell you a story about one of these numbers. If you've ever used this table, you've used this number, 2 air changes per hour. That's the most common number in the table. It's our outside air ventilation number. We use it for most spaces. I tracked this number through history. It was in the code in the 70s, it was there in the 60s, I found it in the 40s to 20s to 1910s, I kept going back, and finally the earliest reference I found is this one, from the 1870s. So I've come to call 2 air changes per hour our horse and buggy number. It predates the light bulb, the car for sure, and most of the railroads. Let me tell you what it was like to be in a hospital prior to the 1870s. Patients were in wards, often unventilated, lit by candles or oil-burning lamps. They did not bathe often. They didn't have bathrooms. You do your business in a bedpan, put it under your bed, and wait for the nurse to come around and empty the bedpan. So the wards had this horrible smell and hygiene problem, famously pointed out by Florence Nightingale. Starting in the 1870s and 1880s, architects started putting in ventilation, and they put in enough window area to, and I quote, exchange the volume of air twice per hour. So you'll find that number, 2 air changes per hour, in the architectural literature of 140 years ago, and we still use it today. There's nothing noble about this number, folks. It's just an old number. Now, I don't want to lead you to believe that the whole practice of hospital HVAC is bogus. That's not true. There are areas where the intent and the clinical connection is pretty clear, and those are our critical spaces. In operating rooms, we're doing kind of a rudimentary clean room design, intended to reduce the risk of surgical site infection. We have airborne isolation spaces that we use to prevent the spread of airborne diseases like chickenpox and tuberculosis are really the 2 big ones that we worry about today. And then, of course, protective environments for highly immune compromised cases, live organ transplants, things like that. But these are critical spaces. They don't actually account for much of the hospital. What about the rest of the hospital? What about the general patient rooms, the D&T areas, circulation areas, things like that? Well, I spent about 3 years of my life looking up the origin story behind a lot of these numbers. My teenage daughter says that history papers are for dummies, and I guess that makes me a dummy because I wrote 2 of them. And there's some fun stories in there, I won't lie. But that's about it. Most of those pressure relationships that we hold so dear, they really don't have any science behind them. But hey, that's just me, right? I'm just an engineer. No ASHRAE committee is ever going to read this, right? So what we need is some real science to look at, right? So here are 7 meta-studies where they looked at hundreds of clinical papers and tried to find overall relationships, and they're all inconclusive. The only thing these researchers can seem to agree on is that we need more research, which is a very self-serving conclusion for researchers to come up with. But hey, these are just science guys, right? No ASHRAE code committee is ever going to read this sciencey stuff. What we need is an ASHRAE research project. Doing an ASHRAE research project. It's a joint research project between ASHRAE and ASHE and FGI, and its official title is Investigating the Evidence Basis Behind ASHRAE 170. The researchers have identified 882 requirements or something like that in 170, and they are scouring the earth to try to find evidence to support them. Now, I haven't seen it. Nobody's seen it. It's in progress. But if you want to place bets, I will stay after the meeting, and I'm taking bets. My bet is most of the requirements in 170 are circular, and they don't really have an origin. We've been repeating them for years and years and years, since about 1960s, and we're not really going to find any evidence behind them, right? In particular, nobody's getting any benefit from those total air change per hours where we're over-ventilating all of our non-critical spaces. And we are over-ventilating. Here's a good example. This is a pilot project we did in the LDRP wing in Los Angeles. Los Angeles is a cooling climate, so the amount of air that you need is mostly driven by how much cooling you need to do. And so these mountains that you see here show the amount of air that you need to cool the room over the hours of the day. The blue line's a winter day, and the purple line is a spring day, and the red line is a summer day, right? And the horizontal lines that you see across there are the code and standard requirements. So if we were just talking about a hygiene level, indoor air quality level, we'd be at one of those bottom lines there. Then you have 2 air changes per hour. That's about double the hygiene level. That's that light gray line down there. But the real kicker is the line up at the top. That's 6 air changes per hour. That's way up there. Now you can see that's kind of appropriate for a summer day, for a summer afternoon, but the rest of the year we are over-ventilating that space. Over-ventilation that we do on a summer day. Here's the amount of over-ventilation that we're doing on a winter day. And again, 90% of US hospitals have central air systems with terminal reheat. So all that air that we put into the room goes through a central system, moved by a fan, then it gets cooled and it gets reheated at the end. And so if you think about this kind of overventilation and multiply it times every patient room in the building or in the country, man, you could really start to see why our energy use is so high. Because look, guys, this campus that I'm showing you here is 1.6 million square foot of space. I mean, sure, we have operating rooms and we have isolation rooms and we have critical spaces like that, but there's less than 100,000 square foot of those on this campus. That is to say, we've got 1.5 million square foot of space here that is not OR and not isolation room and not critical space. And that's what's killing our energy bill. It's all those 6 air change per hour in patient rooms and 6 air change per hour in exam rooms and 4 air change per hour in hallways. That's what's getting us, guys. What I love to do when I talk to HVAC engineers like this is to ask them this question. I want you to imagine that this table that you're looking at is gone and it's just completely erased. And I did some sort of magic, and I not only erased the version that's in the code today, but I erased all the previous versions from history. But I still want an HVAC engineer to do a job. It's a patient floor. The staff is in the middle, and that yellow space in the middle, and up in the right-hand corner, there's an airborne isolation room. And so I ask, without the table to guide you, could you design an HVAC system to keep these spaces comfortable, control odors, have good air quality, and keep the air in that isolation room separated? Yeah, of course you could. Any self-respecting HVAC engineer who's worth his salt can do this job. Can you also make it low energy? Can you design this job for an EUI of about 65? Yeah, of course you can. It's pretty simple with the VAV system, in fact. My whole point of advocacy is this: we literally don't need this table. This is ASHRAE. We know how to do comfort. We know how to do indoor air quality. We know how to do those and achieve energy efficiency at the same time. We know how to do all that. We have a whole modern design toolkit for HVAC, and we're using this 1960s cookbook instead. This standard is not helping our industry. This standard is holding us back. I actually need your help. If you're in this room, whether you're an ASHRAE member or not, I need your help. We need to make some noise. I can't tell you how often I've had hospital HVAC design engineers complain to me, oh, we're a slave to the code, we're a slave to the AHJs. We could do energy efficiency if it wasn't for the code, if it wasn't for the, OSHPOD or whatever it is. And they're right. This standard is holding us hostage to an old 1968 cookbook. But listen, the time is now. In 6 months' time, ASHRAE is going to publish a research project that I'm betting is going to say there's no evidence behind most of these non-critical air change rates. And at that time, ASHRAE needs to roll back any requirement that we can't reasonably defend. And in place of those old 1960s requirements, we need a new set of HVAC tools based on the best knowledge that we have that's available to us today, based on indoor air quality, based on comfort, based on clean rooms for critical spaces, based on all the experience that we have here at ASHRAE, we can design net zero hospitals right now using the technology that we have right now. I fully believe it's possible. We just need to get the damn code out of our way.